The neon sign of Diner flickered against the rain-soaked windows as Williams wiped down the last table of her double shift. At 28, she had been working at this downtown Chicago diner for 3 years, saving every penny she could while studying nursing through online classes. The clock above the coffee machine read 11:47 p.m., and the last customer had left 20 minutes ago. His feet ached in her worn sneakers as she moved between the empty booths, collecting forgotten napkins and checking for any missed spills. The rain outside had turned into a steady downpour, drumming against the large front windows that looked out onto the dimly lit street. She pulled her phone from her apron pocket and saw 2 missed calls from her younger brother. He was probably wondering when she'd be home to help with his homework again. As she reached for her jacket hanging behind the counter, a sound from the back alley caught her attention. It was barely audible over the rain, but she could have sworn she heard crying. Not just any crying, but the distinct wail of a baby. Paused, listening carefully. There it was again, definitely a baby's cry, and it sounded like there might be more than one. "That's strange," she muttered to herself, grabbing a flashlight from under the register. The alley behind's diner was usually empty except for the dumpster and a few parked cars belonging to the night shift workers from the nearby hospital. She had never heard Bobby's crying back there before. Unlocked the back door and stepped into the cold night air. The rain immediately soaked through her uniform as she followed the sound deeper into the alley. The crying was getting louder now, more urgent. She swept her flashlight beam across the narrow space between the buildings, past the dumpster, and toward a dark sedan parked against the far wall. What she saw next made her heart stop. A man was slumped against the brick wall beside the car, his expensive suit torn and soaked with what looked like blood in the dim light. His head was tilted back, and his breathing was shallow and labored. But what truly shocked her were the 2 infant car seats placed carefully beside him on the dry ground under a small overhang. Inside each seat was a crying baby, both appearing to be only a few months old. "Oh my God," whispered, rushing toward them. The man's eyes fluttered open as she approached, revealing dark brown eyes filled with pain and something else she couldn't quite identify. Desperation, maybe, or fear. "Please," the man gasped, his voice barely audible over the rain and the Bobby's cries. "Help them, please help my children." Knelt beside him, her nursing training immediately taking over despite her shock. She could see the gunshot wound in his shoulder, the blood seeping through his white dress shirt. It looked serious, but not immediately life-threatening if he got medical attention soon. The Bobbies, however, were her first priority. They were soaked and cold, their tiny faces red from crying. "Sir, I'm going to help you, but first I need to get these Bobbies inside where it's warm and dry," she said, speaking clearly and calmly despite her racing heart. "Can you tell me your name?" The man tried to speak, but only managed a weak cough. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, and realized the wound might be worse than it initially appeared. She quickly scooped up both car seats, surprised by how heavy they were, and carried them toward the diner's back door. "I'll be right back for you," she called over her shoulder. "Don't try to move." Inside the diner, set the car seats on the counter and quickly assessed the situation. The Bobbies appeared to be twins, both with dark hair and olive skin. They were dressed in expensive-looking clothes, but they were soaked through and shivering. She grabbed clean kitchen towels and began gently drying them off, speaking in soothing tones. "It's okay, little ones. You're safe now. Let's get you warm and dry." The Bobbies gradually stopped crying as she wrapped them in dry towels. One of them, who appeared slightly larger, looked up at her with dark eyes that reminded her of their father. The other baby had fallen asleep, exhausted from crying. His heart ached for them. Whatever was happening, these innocent children were caught in the middle of something dangerous. She grabbed her phone and hesitated. Her first instinct was to call 911, but something about the man's expensive clothes and the way he had begged her to help his children made her pause. She had grown up in this neighborhood, and she knew that not every situation involving injured men and crying Bobbies was straightforward. Sometimes calling the police immediately could make things worse, especially for people who looked like her. Instead, she decided to go back and try to get more information from the man before making any calls. She locked the diner's front door and turned off the main lights, leaving only the dim security lighting on. The Bobbies were warm and safe for now, and she needed to help their father before he lost too much blood. Back in the alley, the man was still conscious but clearly fatting. Knelt beside him again, this time with a clean kitchen towel to apply pressure to his wound. He winced but didn't pull away. "What's your name?" she asked again, more gently this time. I need to know who you are so I can help you properly. Vincent, he managed to whisper. Vincent, those are my sons, and Michael, they're 6 months old. The last name sounded Italian, and something about the way he said it made think it might be important. She had heard that name before, but she couldn't quite place where. Living in Chicago, she knew there were certain families and certain names that carried weight in the city's underground world, but she had always stayed far away from that life. Vincent, I need to call for help. You've been shot and you need medical attention. Can you tell me who did this to you? Vincent's eyes widened with what looked like panic. No police, he gasped. Please, no police, they'll find us, they'll hurt my boys. Felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold rain. Who will find you? Vincent, if someone is after you, then we need to call the authorities. You don't understand, Vincent said, gripping her wrist with surprising strength for someone who had lost so much blood. I can't explain everything, but there are people who want me dead. If they find out where I am, they'll come for my sons too. They're innocent. They don't deserve to pay for my mistakes. The desperation in his voice was heartbreaking. Looked back toward the diner where the two Bobbies were safe and warm, then back at their father who was bleeding in an alley in the rain. She had always prided herself on making smart, careful decisions. She worked hard, stayed out of trouble, and focused on building a better life for herself and her family. But something about this moment felt different. These Bobbies needed help, and their father was begging her not to make the call that could put them in more danger. Vincent, I'm a nursing student, not a doctor. You need real medical help, and I can't provide that here. But if I don't call the police, how do I get you to a hospital? My car, Vincent said weakly, nodding toward the sedan. Keys in my pocket, drive us to Mary's, emergency entrance. Tell them I was mugged, that you found me on the street. Don't mention where, please. His mind raced. This was asking her to lie to medical professionals and potentially put herself in legal jeopardy. But as she looked at Vincent's pale face and thought about those two innocent Bobbies inside, she felt something shift inside her. Sometimes doing the right thing wasn't the same as following the rules. Can you walk to the car if I help you? She asked. Vincent nodded, though the effort clearly cost him, helped him to his feet, supporting most of his weight as they moved slowly toward the sedan. She was stronger than she looked from years of working on her feet and helping care for her elderly neighbor, Mrs., who had mobility issues. The Bobbies, Vincent said as they reached the car. I need to see them first. They're safe inside. Let me get you settled in the car and then I'll bring them out. It took several minutes to get Vincent situated in the passenger seat. He was losing consciousness intermittently and was genuinely worried he might not make it to the hospital. She found his keys in his jacket pocket and was surprised by how heavy they were. The key ring included what looked like keys to multiple properties and vehicles, along with a small gold charm she didn't recognize. Back inside the diner, gathered the Bobbies in their car seats, was awake and seemed calmer now, while Michael was still sleeping peacefully. She also grabbed a bottle of water and some clean towels from the kitchen, thinking they might be useful at the hospital. Loading the car seats into the back of Vincent's sedan, was struck by how luxurious the interior was. The leather seats were soft and expensive, and there were details throughout the car that suggested significant wealth. The GPS system showed several recent destinations, including addresses in some of Chicago's most exclusive neighborhoods. As she started the car and pulled out of the alley, couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into something much bigger and more dangerous than she understood. Vincent had mentioned people wanting to hurt his children, and his reluctance to involve the police suggested this wasn't a random mugging or robbery gone wrong. The drive to Mary's hospital took 15 minutes through the rain-soaked streets of downtown Chicago. Vincent drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally mumbling what sounded like Italian words. In the back seat, the Bobbies remained mostly quiet, with only occasional soft sounds that reminded they were there. At the emergency entrance, helped Vincent out of the car while a nurse rushed over with a wheelchair. We found him on the street, she said, sticking to the story he had requested. He's been shot and these are his children. I think he's lost a lot of blood. The medical team quickly took over, wheeling Vincent through the automatic doors while followed with the Bobbies. In the bright fluorescent lights of the hospital, she got her first clear look at Vincent's face. He was younger than she had initially thought, probably in his early 30s, with strong features and dark hair. Even injured and unconscious, there was something about him that commanded attention. A nurse approached her while Vincent was being rushed into surgery. "Are you family?" she asked, looking at with kind but curious eyes. "No, I found him. He asked me to help with his children." The nurse nodded and began asking questions about the circumstances of the shooting and Vincent's condition when she found him. Answered as honestly as she could while being careful not to mention the diner or provide details that might contradict Vincent's request for secrecy. As the night wore on, found herself sitting in the hospital waiting room with two Bobbies who weren't hers, waiting for news about a man she had met only hours ago. The Bobbies needed formula and diapers, which the hospital staff was able to provide. Seemed particularly alert, watching S's face intently as she fed him, while Michael was content to sleep in her arms. Around 3 a.m., a doctor emerged from the surgical area looking tired but relieved. "The patient is stable," he announced. "The bullet damaged some tissue in his shoulder, but we were able to remove it cleanly. He's lucky it didn't hit any major arteries. He'll need to stay for observation, but he should make a full recovery." Felt a wave of relief she hadn't expected. Somewhere during the course of the evening, she had become emotionally invested in Vincent's survival, not just for his sake, but for his children's sake. These Bobbies needed their father, whatever else might be happening in his life. But as she sat in that hospital waiting room, holding two sleeping Bobbies and thinking about the expensive car in the parking lot, and the fear in Vincent's eyes when he begged her not to call the police, couldn't shake the feeling that helping him might have been the easy part. The hard part was going to be figuring out what came next, and whether she had just stepped into a situation that could change her life in ways she couldn't imagine. The morning shift was arriving at the hospital, and realized she needed to call in sick to her day job at the nursing home. She also needed to figure out what to tell her brother about why she hadn't come home. But mostly, she needed to understand who Vincent really was, and what kind of danger he believed his children were in. As she looked down at its peaceful sleeping face, made a decision that would alter the course of her life forever. Whatever Vincent was involved in, whatever had led to him being shot and left in an alley with his infant sons, she was going to help him figure it out. These Bobbies deserved to be safe, and if that meant Vincent woke up slowly, his vision blurry and his shoulder throbbing with pain. The sterile smell of disinfectant and the steady beeping of medical equipment told him he was in a hospital before he even opened his eyes fully. Panic immediately set in as he remembered the events of the previous night, and he tried to sit up despite the pain shooting through his body. "Easy there," came a gentle voice from beside his bed. "You're safe, and so are your boys." Vincent turned his head to see sitting in a chair next to his hospital bed, holding one of his sons, while the other slept in a portable crib the nurses had brought in. The sight of this stranger caring for his children filled him with a mixture of gratitude and confusion that he struggled to process. "You stayed," he said, his voice hoarse from the anesthesia and pain medication. Nodded, adjusting in her arms as she fed him a bottle. "Someone had to watch over them. The nurses have been helpful, but they're busy with other patients. Your sons are beautiful, by the way. Here is quite the little fighter, and Michael seems to be the calm one." Vincent watched her interact with his children, nodding the natural way she held and the gentle tone she used when speaking to him. It had been 3 weeks since their mother died in a car accident, and Vincent had been struggling to care for them alone while managing the crisis that had erupted in his business life. Seeing someone else care for them with such tenderness stirred emotions he thought he had buried. "I need to ask you something," Vincent said, trying to sit up more comfortably. "Last night when you found us, you could have just called the police and walked away. Why didn't you?" Was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. "I grew up in this neighborhood, Vincent. I know that sometimes calling the police first and asking questions later can make situations worse, especially for people who don't have the luxury of assuming the system will protect them. You were hurt, your Bobbies needed help, and you asked me not to call them. Something about the way you said it made me think you had good reasons." "You don't know anything about me," Vincent said quietly. "For all you know, I could be dangerous." "Are you," asked directly, meeting his eyes, "are you dangerous to me or to these children?" Vincent looked at his sleeping sons and felt the familiar weight of responsibility and love that had been driving his decisions for months. "Not to you, and never to them. Everything I do is to protect them." "Then that's all I need to know for now," said. "But I think we need to talk about what happens next. The hospital staff assumes I'm a family friend helping out, but they're going to start asking more questions soon. And you mentioned last night that there are people looking for you." Vincent closed his eyes and tried to think through their situation clearly. The medication made it difficult to focus, but he knew was right. They couldn't stay at the hospital indefinitely, and he needed to figure out how to keep his son safe while dealing with the mess his life had become. "There's something you should know about me," Vincent said finally. "My family name, it means something in this city. My father and my uncle run certain business operations that aren't entirely legal. I've been trying to distance myself from that world, especially since the boys were born, but it's complicated." Felt her stomach tighten, but she kept her expression calm. She had suspected something like this from the expensive clothes and car, and the way Vincent had reacted to the suggestion of calling the police. "What kind of business operations?" "The kind where people solve problems with violence," Vincent said bluntly. "The kind where having children makes you a target instead of protection. 3 weeks ago, my wife Maria died in what the police called a car accident, but I think someone arranged it to send me a message." The words hung in the air between them and felt the full weight of what she had gotten herself involved in. She looked down at, who had finished his bottle and was looking up at her with dark, trusting eyes, and realized that regardless of what Vincent's family did for a living, these bobbies were innocent. "Who shot you last night?" she asked. "I'm not entirely sure," Vincent admitted. "There's been a power struggle within the organization since my father had his heart attack 6 months ago. Some people think I should step up and take a more active role in the business. Others think I'm weak because I've been trying to go legitimate. I was meeting with someone I thought I could trust to discuss a way out, and instead I ended up bleeding in an alley." "And you think whoever shot you might come after your children?" Vincent's jaw tightened. "In my world, family members are often considered acceptable targets. My son's existence makes me vulnerable, which some people see as a strategic advantage. I can't take them back to my apartment or to any of the family properties. Too many people know about those places." Stood up and walked to the window, still holding. Outside, Chicago was waking up to another rainy morning, and she could see people hurrying to work with umbrellas and coffee cups, living normal lives that didn't involve gunshot wounds and family crime organizations. She thought about her own life, her plans to finish nursing school and maybe eventually move to a better neighborhood. Getting involved with Vincent could derail all of that. But when she turned back to look at him struggling to sit up in his hospital bed, clearly in pain, but more worried about his children than himself, she realized she had already made her choice the night before in that alley. "I have an idea," she said slowly. "It's probably crazy, but it might work temporarily." "I'm listening." "My apartment is in a building where most people mind their own business. It's not fancy, but it's clean and safe, and nobody would think to look for someone like you there. You could stay there while you recover and figure out a more permanent solution." Vincent stared at her in amazement. "You're offering to let me and my children stay in your home? You barely know me, and I just told you that my family is involved in organized crime. You also told me that you've been trying to get out of that life, and that everything you do is to protect your sons," replied. "Look, I'm not naive. I know this could be dangerous for me. But these bobbies need stability and safety while you figure things out, and right now, my apartment might be the one place in Chicago where no one would expect to find Vincent." Vincent was quiet for several minutes, considering her offer. The logical part of his mind told him that accepting help from this woman would put her in danger and complicate his already difficult situation. But the practical part of his mind recognized that he had very few options, and his children's safety had to be the priority. "There are some things you should know if you're serious about this," he said finally. "First, I have resources. I can pay you well for helping us, and I can make sure your bills are covered and that you don't lose income from missing work. Second, there might be times when dangerous people come looking for me, and I need to know that you understand what that could mean for you." "What kind of dangerous people?" "The kind who don't care about collateral damage," Vincent said honestly. "The kind who might hurt you just because you were helping me, even if you're not involved in the business side of things." Sat back down, shifting to her other arm. She had never been in a situation like this before, but she also knew that some of the most important decisions in life required taking calculated risks. Her grandmother had always told her to trust her instincts about people, and despite everything Vincent had told her about his family's business, her instincts told her that he was a good man caught in a bad situation. "How long do you think you'd need to stay?" she asked. "I don't know," Vincent admitted. "Maybe a few weeks while I recover and make arrangements. I have some ideas about getting out of Chicago entirely, starting over somewhere else with the boys. But I need time to heal and to liquidate some assets without attracting attention. And what happens if these dangerous people figure out where you are? Vincent met her eyes seriously. Then I would leave immediately, even if it meant putting myself at risk. I would never let anything happen to you because you helped us. Believed him. There was something in his voice and his expression that convinced her he was telling the truth. She looked down at, who had fallen asleep in her arms, and then over at Michael, who was starting to stir in his crib. Okay, she said quietly. We can try this, but I have some conditions. Name them. First, you're honest with me about anything that might affect my safety or the safety of these children. No surprises, no protecting me by keeping me in the dark. Second, if at any point I decide this isn't working or I'm in over my head, you respect that decision and make other arrangements. Third, we focus on what's best for Michael. Whatever problems you have with your family or their business, these bobbies don't get hurt because of adult decisions they had no part in making. Vincent nodded slowly. Those are fair terms, and I want you to know that I'll never forget what you're doing for us. Most people would have walked away. Most people haven't spent 3 years watching families struggle to take care of their children while working multiple jobs and trying to build something better, replied. I know what it looks like when someone is trying to do right by their kids, even when the circumstances are complicated. A nurse knocked on the door and entered with paperwork for Vincent's discharge. The doctor had cleared him to leave as long as he promised to rest and return for follow-up appointments. His shoulder would be in a sling for several weeks, and he had been given strong pain medication, but the surgery had been successful. As they prepared to leave the hospital, felt a mixture of excitement and terror about what she was getting herself into. She called her supervisor at the nursing home and arranged to take several days of personal time, citing a family emergency. She also texted her brother to let him know she would be staying at a friend's place for a few days to help with a situation, being deliberately vague about the details. Vincent's expensive sedan was still in the hospital parking lot, and realized that driving such an obvious vehicle to her neighborhood might attract unwanted attention. Instead, they called a taxi and asked the driver to wait while Vincent retrieved some items from his car, including what appeared to be a substantial amount of cash from a hidden compartment. The ride to apartment building took them through several different neighborhoods, each one getting gradually less affluent. Vincent watched out the window as luxury high-rises gave way to modest apartment buildings, and eventually to the working-class area where lived. He had spent most of his life in Chicago, but realized he had never really seen this part of the city where regular people lived and worked. His apartment was on the 3rd floor of a brick building that had seen better days, but was well-maintained. As they climbed the stairs with the bobbies and their supplies, Vincent was struck by how different this was from the penthouse apartment he shared with Maria before her death, or the family compound where he had grown up. Inside, the apartment was small but clean and comfortable. There were textbooks stacked on the kitchen table, and a photo on the refrigerator showed in a graduation cap and gown with a teenage boy Vincent assumed was her brother. The living room had a couch and a small television, and there were plants on the windowsill that suggested someone who cared about making a space feel like home. It's not much, said, suddenly feeling self-conscious about her modest living situation. It's perfect, Vincent replied, and he meant it. For the first time in months, he was in a place where his children might actually be safe, where he could focus on healing and planning their future without constantly looking over his shoulder. As helped him settle the bobbies in the living room and showed him where everything was, Vincent began to understand that this woman had just given him something more valuable than money or connections or power. She had given him a chance to be the father his sons needed him to be, and the opportunity to figure out how to build a life worthy of their trust. The first week of sharing her apartment with Vincent and his sons established a rhythm that surprised with how natural it felt. Vincent proved to be an attentive father despite his injury, waking up for nighttime feedings and diaper changes even when the pain medication made him groggy. Found herself growing attached to the twins, especially, who seemed to prefer her company and would calm down faster when she held him. Vincent's presence in her space was different from what she had expected. Despite his expensive clothes and obvious wealth, he was respectful and helpful around the apartment. He insisted on paying for groceries and supplies, and when protested that it was too much money, He explained that staying under the radar meant he couldn't use credit cards or access his normal bank accounts. "I have cash stored in several places around the city," he told her as they fed the Bobbies breakfast on Thursday morning. "It's part of always having an exit strategy. I never thought I'd need it for this situation, but I'm grateful I planned ahead." "How much cash are we talking about?" asked, genuinely curious about how someone in his position managed their money. Vincent smiled, the first genuinely relaxed smile she had seen from him. "Enough to keep us comfortable for several months, and enough to make sure you're compensated for the risk you're taking. I told you I have resources, and I meant it." What struck most was how different Vincent was from her assumptions about people involved in organized crime. He was intelligent and well-read, often referencing books and current events during their conversations. He was gentle with his children and respectful toward her, never making assumptions or demands despite the fact that she was helping him. On Friday afternoon, while the Bobbies napped and Vincent rested on the couch, decided to address something that had been bothering her. "Can I ask you about your wife?" she said, sitting in the chair across from him. "You mentioned that her death might not have been accidental." Vincent's expression darkened, and he was quiet for several minutes before responding. "Maria wasn't involved in the family business at all. She was a teacher, actually, elementary school. She met me at a charity event 3 years ago, and I fell in love with her kindness and her laugh. When I told her about my family, she said she didn't care about my last name as long as I was trying to be a good man." "She sounds wonderful." "She was, and she was the one who convinced me to start pulling away from the organization. When we found out she was pregnant with twins, I made the decision to go completely legitimate. I started a consulting business, moved money into legal investments, bought the apartment downtown so we could live away from the family properties." "But someone didn't like that decision." Vincent nodded slowly. "My uncle has been running operations while my father recovers from his heart attack. He sees my withdrawal as a sign of weakness, and he's been pushing for me to take a more active leadership role. When I refused, things got complicated." "Complicated how?" "Business partnerships started dissolving. Competitors became more aggressive. Money that should have been coming in stopped flowing. Claimed it was just bad luck and market forces, but I suspected he was sabotaging my legitimate businesses to force me back into the fold." Listened carefully, trying to understand the complex family dynamics that had led to Vincent being shot in an alley. "And you think your uncle might have arranged for Maria's accident?" "The night before she died, we had a big argument about leaving Chicago entirely. She wanted to take the boys and move to her sister's place in Portland, start completely over where no one knew our name. I was resistant because I thought we could make it work here, that I could protect our new life without running away." Vincent's voice broke slightly. "The next morning, she was driving to the grocery store when a truck ran a red light and hit her car. The driver disappeared, and the truck turned out to be stolen." "I'm so sorry, Vincent. That must have been devastating." "The guilt is the worst part," he continued. "If I had just agreed to leave when she wanted to, she'd still be alive. The boys would have their mother. Instead, I was too proud and too stubborn, and now she's gone." Reached across and touched his uninjured hand. "You can't blame yourself for someone else's evil actions. If your uncle arranged that accident, the responsibility is his, not yours." Vincent appreciated her attempt to comfort him, but she could see the guilt was still eating at him. "After Maria died, came to me with an offer. He said if I came back to the family business, he would make sure the boys and I were protected. If I continued trying to stay independent, he couldn't guarantee our safety." "That sounds more like a threat than an offer." "It was both. That's how these things work. The line between protection and intimidation is very thin in my world." Vincent shifted on the couch, wincing as the movement pulled at his injured shoulder. "I told him I needed time to think about it, that I was still grieving and not ready to make major decisions. He gave me 2 weeks." "When was that conversation?" 10 days ago, which means I have 4 days left to give him an answer." Felt a chill of realization. "And the meeting where you got shot, was that related to trying to find another option?" Vincent nodded. "I was meeting with someone I thought could help me disappear with the boys. Someone who claimed to have connections for creating new identities and relocating families. Instead, it was a setup. I think wanted me roughed up as a reminder of what happens when people don't cooperate." "But they didn't just rough you up. They shot you and left you for dead." which suggests that either the plan went wrong or has decided I'm more trouble than I'm worth, Vincent said grimly. Either way, it means staying in Chicago isn't an option anymore. I need to get the boys somewhere safe, and I need to do it before my uncle realizes I'm still alive. Stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street below. A part of her was relieved that Vincent was talking about leaving, because it would mean her life could go back to normal. But another part of her had grown attached to the daily routine of caring for Michael, and even to the conversations with Vincent that challenged her understanding of how complicated people's lives could be. "Where would you go?" she asked. "I have some ideas. Maria's sister in Portland doesn't know the details about my family, but she knows we were having problems. I could contact her, explain that I want to honor Maria's wishes and bring the boys to be near her family. Portland is far enough away that influence wouldn't reach there, and it's a big enough city that we could blend in. What about your consulting business and your legitimate investments?" "I'll have to liquidate everything I can without attracting attention and write off the rest as the cost of freedom," Vincent replied. "Money can be replaced. My sons' lives can't be." That evening, after the Bobbies were asleep, Vincent showed how to access one of his hidden cash reserves. They took a taxi to a storage facility across town, where Vincent used a key from his heavy key ring to open a unit containing several boxes of documents and supplies. "I started preparing for this possibility when the boys were born," he explained, as he retrieved a waterproof bag containing cash and what appeared to be fake identification documents. "I hoped I'd never need an exit strategy, but my father always taught me to plan for the worst-case scenario." Watched him count out a substantial sum of money, more cash than she had ever seen in one place. "How much is this?" "Enough to get us to Portland and keep us comfortable while I establish a new identity and find work," Vincent said. "And enough to make sure you're taken care of for helping us." He handed her an envelope containing more money than she made in 3 months of working 2 jobs. "Vincent, this is too much. I can't accept this." "Yes, you can. You've risked your safety and disrupted your life to help me and my children. This money doesn't even begin to repay what you've done for us, but it's a start." He met her eyes seriously. "Besides, I'm going to need one more favor from you, and this one is bigger than letting us stay in your apartment." "What kind of favor?" "I need you to come with us to Portland." Stared at him in shock. "What? Vincent, I can't just leave Chicago. I have a job, I'm in school, my brother depends on me." "Hear me out," Vincent said quickly. "The boys are attached to you, especially. They've lost their mother, and now they're about to lose the only stable home they've known since her death. Having you there to help them adjust to a new city would make the transition easier for them." "For how long?" "A few weeks, maybe a month. Just until I can find a nanny or until I'm healed enough to manage everything myself. I know it's a huge thing to ask, and I'll pay you well for the time. You could take it as a paid vacation, and when you come back to Chicago, you'll have enough money to quit one of your jobs and focus more on school." His mind raced through the implications of Vincent's request. Leaving Chicago, even temporarily, would mean abandoning her carefully planned life. But it would also mean an opportunity to help 2 innocent Bobbies who had already lost so much, and the chance to earn enough money to significantly improve her financial situation. "What about my brother? I can't just disappear without explaining where I'm going." "Bring him with us," Vincent suggested. "Portland has good schools, and it might be a chance for him to experience life in a different city. I'd cover all the expenses, and we could frame it as a family vacation that got extended." "This is crazy, Vincent. A week ago, I was a waitress living paycheck to paycheck. Now you're asking me to relocate to another state with a man I barely know and his children." "I know it's crazy, but sometimes the right thing to do doesn't make logical sense. These boys need you, and honestly, so do I. I don't think I can do this alone." Looked at the money in her hands, then back at Vincent's earnest expression. Through the storage unit's small window, she could see the city lights of Chicago stretching to the horizon, representing the life she had built and the future she had planned. But upstairs in her apartment were 2 Bobbies who called her name and reached for her when they were upset, and a man who had shown her that sometimes taking care of other people was more important than protecting yourself. "I need to think about it," she said finally, "and I need to talk to. This decision affects him too." "Of course, take all the time you need, but we probably need to leave within the next few days. The longer we stay here, the more dangerous it becomes for all of us." As they rode back to her apartment in another taxi, realized that her life had already changed in ways she couldn't undo. Whether she went to Portland with Vincent or stayed in Chicago, she would always remember these weeks when she had been needed by someone in a way that mattered, when her choices had direct consequences for the safety and of two innocent children. The question now was whether she was brave enough to take the next step into an uncertain future, or whether she would play it safe and return to the predictable challenges of her old life. Either choice would have consequences, but only one would allow her to continue being the person these bobbies needed her to be. Back in her apartment, as she watched Vincent give his nighttime bottle, began to understand that some decisions couldn't be made with logic and careful planning. Sometimes you had to trust your heart and hope that doing the right thing would lead to the right outcome, even when you couldn't see clearly where you were going. Williams looked up from his homework when walked into the apartment Sunday evening, clearly agitated and carrying shopping bags filled with baby supplies. At 16, he had grown accustomed to his older sister's unpredictable schedule and her tendency to bring home strays. But the presence of a well-dressed white man and two bobbies in their living room was beyond anything he had expected. "What the hell is going on?" asked, closing his algebra textbook and standing up from the kitchen table. "Language," said automatically, then realized how ridiculous that sounded given the circumstances. "This is Vincent, and these are his sons and Michael. They're staying with us for a few days." Looked from Vincent, who was sitting on the couch with his arm in a sling, to the two bobbies in their car seats, then back to his sister. "Since when do we babysit for rich white dudes? And why does he look like he got beat up?" Vincent stood up carefully, extending his uninjured hand toward. "Your sister saved my life, and probably my son's lives too. I know this situation is unusual, but I want you to know I respect what she's done for us, and I respect this home." Shook Vincent's hand reluctantly, nodding the expensive watch and the quality of his clothes despite their rumpled state. "Are you a cop or something?" "No, I'm not a cop," Vincent replied honestly. "I'm someone who got into trouble with some dangerous people, and your sister was kind enough to help when I had nowhere else to turn." Could see processing this information, his street-smart instincts telling him there was more to the story than Vincent was sharing. She had always been honest with her brother about important things, and she realized this situation was going to require a level of honesty that might frighten him. "Can I talk to you privately?" she asked, nodding toward her bedroom. Inside her room with the door closed, explained as much as she could about how she had found Vincent and what she had learned about his situation. She watched her brother's expression change from confusion to concern to outright alarm as she described the shooting, the hospital visit, and Vincent's connections to organized crime. "Are you out of your damn mind?" said when she finished. "You brought a Mafia guy and his kids into our apartment. What happens when his enemies figure out where he is?" "He's not a Mafia guy exactly. He was trying to get out of that life when someone shot him, and his sons are innocent bobbies who need help." "I don't care how innocent those bobbies are. This is dangerous, and you know it. What happens to me if something goes wrong? What happens if you get hurt or killed because you're helping some criminal?" Sat down on her bed, feeling the weight of her brother's concerns. Had lost their parents when he was 12, and she had been his guardian and primary support system ever since. She had always made decisions based on what was best for both of them, but this time she was asking him to trust her judgment in a situation that could put them both at risk. "There's something else I need to tell you," she said quietly. "Vincent is leaving Chicago in a few days, going to Portland to start over with his sons. He's asked me to come with them to help with the bobbies while he gets settled." "For how long?" "Maybe a month, maybe longer. I haven't decided yet." Stared at her in disbelief. "You're thinking about leaving Chicago? With him? You don't even know this guy. How do you know he's telling you the truth about anything?" "I don't know for certain," she admitted. "But I've spent a week watching him with those bobbies, and I can tell he loves them. I've seen how scared he is about their safety and how grateful he is for help. Whatever else he might have done in his life, he's a good father who's trying to protect his children." "And what about me? Am I supposed to just stay here by myself while you run off to Portland with your new boyfriend and his kids?" "First of all, he's not my boyfriend. This is about helping two bobbies who have already lost their mother. And second, you wouldn't be staying here by yourself. Vincent suggested that you could come with us." Laughed bitterly. "Oh, great. So now I'm supposed to abandon my school and my friends to play house with a criminal family in Portland. This just keeps getting better. Understood her brother's anger, but she also knew she needed him to understand why this decision felt so important to her. Do you remember when Mom died, and we were staying with Aunt Carol for those first few weeks? Of course I remember. What does that have to do with anything? Do you remember how lost and scared we felt, not knowing what was going to happen to us or whether we'd be okay? And do you remember how much it meant when Mrs. from next door started coming over to help with meals and homework, just because she saw that we needed help? Nodded slowly, beginning to see where his sister was going with this. Those Bobbies are in the same situation we were in, except they're too young to even understand what's happening to them. Their mother is dead, their father is injured and running from dangerous people, and they need someone to take care of them while he figures out how to keep them safe. I can be that person for them. I can make sure they're okay during the scariest time in their lives. But why does it have to be you? Why can't he hire a professional nanny or find some other solution? Because they trust me, said simply. Reaches for me when he's upset. Michael falls asleep easier when I'm holding him. They've already lost so much, and taking away another person they've bonded with would just cause them more trauma. Was quiet for several minutes, clearly struggling with the decision his sister was asking him to make. Finally, he looked up at her with an expression that was older than his 16 years. If we do this, if we go with them to Portland, what happens when it's time to come back? How do we know this Vincent guy won't decide he needs us to stay longer, or that it's too dangerous for us to leave? We set clear boundaries from the beginning, replied. We make it clear that this is temporary, and we keep enough money aside for bus tickets home if we need to leave suddenly. And if at any point you're uncomfortable or you want to come back to Chicago, we leave immediately. No discussion, no arguing. Your safety and are more important to me than anything else. What about school? I'm supposed to graduate next year. Portland has good schools. We could enroll you temporarily, and if you end up liking it there, maybe we consider staying longer. If not, we come back and you finish your senior year here. Either way, I'll make sure your education doesn't suffer. Walked to the window and looked out at the street where he had grown up, weighing his options. Could see him thinking through the practical implications of what she was proposing, but she could also see something else in his expression. Curiosity, maybe, or excitement about the possibility of experiencing life somewhere new. How much money are we talking about? He asked finally. Enough that when we come back to Chicago, I'll be able to quit the diner job and focus on finishing nursing school. Enough that you could apply to any college you want without worrying about whether we can afford it. And you really think this is the right thing to do? Consider the question seriously. I think sometimes life presents you with opportunities to help people who really need it, and those opportunities don't always come at convenient times or in easy packages. I think those Bobbies deserve to have someone who cares about them helping to take care of them. And I think sometimes taking a risk for the right reasons is better than playing it safe for the wrong ones. Turned back from the window and looked at his sister. Okay, but I have conditions. Name them. First, we keep our apartment here. Whatever happens in Portland, we have a place to come back to if things go wrong. Second, you promise me that if this Vincent guy turns out to be different than you think he is, or if the situation becomes dangerous, we leave immediately. No trying to save him or fix his problems if it puts us at risk. Agreed, what else? Third, I want to talk to him myself before we make any final decisions. I want to hear his story directly from him, and I want to be able to ask him questions without you trying to protect his feelings or make excuses for him. Smiled at her brother's mature approach to the situation. That's fair. He's actually been hopping to talk to you anyway. He says he understands that you're an important part of any decision I make. They rejoined Vincent in the living room, where he was feeding Michael while played with a soft toy on the couch beside him. Sat down across from Vincent and studied him carefully before speaking. Told me about your situation, said, I want to hear your version. Vincent appreciated the young man's directness. What specifically do you want to know? Start with why we should trust you. My sister thinks you're a good guy who got mixed up in bad circumstances, but I've seen good guys before, and they don't usually end up shot in alleys with people trying to kill their kids. Vincent smiled at its blunt assessment. You're right to be suspicious. In my experience, most people who claim to be victims of circumstances have made choices that put them in bad situations. He shifted Michael to his shoulder and patted his back gently. I was born into a family where criminal activity was considered a normal way of life. I participated in that life for several years, and I made money from businesses that hurt other people. I'm not going to pretend I was innocent. So what changed? My wife got pregnant. When I found out I was going to be a father, I realized I didn't want my children growing up the way I did, always looking over their shoulders, never knowing who they could trust. I wanted them to have normal lives, to go to regular schools and play sports and date, and go to college without worrying about whether their last name would put them in danger. Glanced at his sister, then back at Vincent. But getting out wasn't as easy as just walking away. No, it wasn't. My family saw my withdrawal as a betrayal, and they started putting pressure on me to come back. When pressure didn't work, they escalated to threats. And when threats didn't work, I think they decided to eliminate the problem entirely. By killing you and your kids. Vincent nodded grimly. Children are leverage in my world. As long as my sons exist, I can be controlled through threats against them. If we disappear entirely, I become irrelevant to the family's business interests. Was quiet for several minutes, processing Vincent's explanation. And you think Portland is far enough away that your family won't follow you there? I think Portland gives us the best chance of disappearing completely. It's a big city where we can blend in. It's far from Chicago, and I have connections there through my late wife's family who don't know anything about my background. What kind of connections? Maria's sister teaches at a public school there. She knows that Maria and I were having marital problems before Maria died, and she knows I want to honor Maria's wishes to raise the boys away from Chicago. She doesn't know the details about my family's business, and there's no reason for her to ever find out. Stood up and walked to where was playing on the couch. The baby looked up at him with curious dark eyes and was surprised by how alert and engaging he seemed for such a young child. What do you need my sister for? Asked. Why can't you just hire someone to help with the kids? Because they trust her, Vincent replied. These bobbies have been through trauma they're too young to understand. They lost their mother, they've been living in an unstable situation while I dealt with family pressure, and now they're about to be uprooted again. Having someone they already know and trust helping them through the transition could make the difference between them feeling safe or feeling abandoned again. Picked up, who immediately grabbed his finger and held on tightly. And after you get settled in Portland, then what? You just let them get attached to my sister and then take them away from her too? That's a fair question, and it's one I've been thinking about a lot, Vincent said honestly. The truth is, I don't know what the long-term arrangement will be. I hope that by the time we're all settled in Portland, the boys will be comfortable enough with a regular or nanny that the transition away from your sister will be easier. But I also recognize that she's become important to them in a way that can't just be replaced. What does that mean exactly? Vincent looked at, then back at. It means that if your sister is willing, and if you're both comfortable with it, I'd like her to remain part of my son's lives permanently, not as an employee, but as family. The room was quiet except for the soft sounds of the bobbies. Felt her heart racing as she processed what Vincent was suggesting. Continued to hold, who seemed perfectly content in his arms. You're talking about more than just a job, said slowly. I'm talking about building a life together that puts these children first, Vincent replied. I'm talking about creating the kind of family they deserve, even if it doesn't look like what anyone expected. Looked at his sister, seeing the hope and fear warring in her expression. And what happens if it doesn't work out? What happens if you decide you don't want us around anymore, or if your family finds you and puts us all in danger? Then I make sure you're both safe and financially secure, whatever that takes, Vincent said firmly. But I want you to know that I would never ask your sister to give up her life in Chicago if I wasn't serious about making this work. She's too important to my sons for me to treat this casually. Handed back to Vincent and sat down next to his sister. It's your decision, but if we're going to do this, we do it together, and we do it with our eyes open about what we might be getting into. Looked around her modest living room, at the textbooks on the table and the photos of her and over the years. Then at Vincent holding his son and looking at her with an expression that combined hope, gratitude, and something deeper that she was afraid to name. 6 months after their arrival in Portland, stood at the window of their rented house in the Hawthorne district, watching and Vincent teach to take his first steps in the backyard. Michael sat in his high chair on the patio, clapping his hands and babbling encouragement to his brother. The scene was so domestic and peaceful that it was hard to believe how their unconventional family had come together. The transition to Portland had been smoother than anyone had expected. Vincent had used his business connections and financial resources to create a convincing backstory about relocating after his wife's death to be closer to her family. They had enrolled in Franklin High School, where he had quickly made friends and joined the basketball team, had found part-time work at a local hospital while finishing her nursing degree through online courses. Most importantly, Vincent had successfully distanced himself from his Chicago family's business interests. Using his knowledge of financial systems and his existing legitimate investments, he had created a consulting company that specialized in helping small businesses optimize their operations. It was honest work that used his skills without requiring any connection to his previous life. "Mama," called out as he wobbled across the grass toward Vincent's outstretched arms. The 11-month-old had started calling her that 2 months ago, and each time he said it, felt a surge of love and belonging that still surprised her. Vincent caught as he tumbled forward, lifting him up in celebration. "You did it, buddy. You walked all the way to Papa." He looked toward the window where was standing and grinned, the happiness on his face a stark contrast to the fearful, injured man she had found in that alley. Smiled back and waved, then returned to the kitchen where she was preparing dinner. It was 17th birthday, and they were having a small celebration with Maria's sister and her family. Had welcomed them into her life without question, believing Vincent's story about wanting to honor Maria's wishes by raising the boys near her extended family. As she seasoned the roast that was cooking in the oven, reflected on how much her life had changed in less than a year. The financial security that Vincent provided had allowed her to focus on her studies and spend quality time with the boys instead of working multiple jobs just to survive. She was on track to graduate with her nursing degree 6 months ahead of schedule, and she had already been offered a position at Oregon Health and Science University Hospital. But more than the financial benefits, she had discovered what it felt like to be part of a family that chose each other rather than being bound together by blood or circumstance. Vincent treated her as an equal partner in raising the boys, consulting her on important decisions and respecting her opinions about their care. Had flourished in his new environment, his grades improving and his confidence growing as he experienced life outside the limited opportunities of their old neighborhood. "Need any help?" Vincent asked, coming into the kitchen with both boys. Was still in his arms, and Michael was crawling determinedly across the floor toward the cabinet where they kept his favorite toys. "Actually, yes. Can you start the salad while I check on the bread?" replied, automatically reaching for, who immediately leaned toward her with his arms outstretched. Vincent handed over his son and began washing lettuce at the sink. They had developed this kind of easy domestic rhythm over the months, sharing and household responsibilities in a way that felt natural rather than forced. There had been moments of tension and adjustment, of course, but they had worked through them by focusing on what was best for Michael. "I got a call from my lawyer today," Vincent said quietly, glancing toward the doorway to make sure was still outside. "The private investigator I hired has been monitoring the situation in Chicago." Felt her stomach tighten with familiar anxiety. Despite their peaceful life in Portland, the threat from Vincent's past was never completely forgotten. What did he find out? "My uncle died 2 weeks ago. Heart attack, apparently. And my father has officially retired from all business activities due to his health. The word on the street is that the organization is fragmenting without strong leadership, and nobody is interested in settling old scores with people who are no longer relevant to current operations." Sat down at the kitchen table, still holding. "What does that mean for us?" "It means we're safe," Vincent said, turning to face her with a smile that reached his eyes for the first time since she had known him. "It means we can stop looking over our shoulders and start making long-term plans. It means we can really build the life we've been pretending to have." The relief felt was overwhelming. For months, she had been waiting for the other shoe to drop, for dangerous men from Vincent's past to show up and destroy the happiness they had built together. The constant low-level fear had affected her sleep and her ability to fully embrace their new life, even when everything seemed to be going well. "Are you sure?" she asked. "How do we know this isn't just a temporary lull?" Vincent sat down across from her, reaching across the table to take her free hand. "We don't know anything for certain, but my contact says the remaining leadership is focused on consolidating power and dealing with federal investigations. Going after someone who disappeared months ago and never caused them any direct problems would be a waste of resources they don't have. Babbled something that sounded like Dada and reached for Vincent, who took him back and settled him on his lap. Michael had found his toy truck and was pushing it around the kitchen floor, making vrooming sounds that filled the comfortable silence. "There's something else I want to talk to you about," Vincent said, his tone becoming more serious. "Something I've been thinking about for a while." "What is it?" "I want to make this official. I want to legally adopt and have you legally adopt and Michael. I want us to be a real family in every sense that matters." Stared at him in shock. "Vincent, that's a huge step. Are you sure you've thought this through?" "I've been thinking about it since Christmas, when called me his stepdad in front of his family, and when gets upset and asks for mama instead of me, and when Michael falls asleep easier in your arms than in mine." Vincent's voice was steady but emotional. "These boys already see you as their mother and has become like a son to me. Making it legal would just recognize what already exists." "But what about Maria? Don't you feel like you'd be betraying her memory?" Vincent was quiet for a moment, considering how to explain his feelings. "Maria wanted our sons to grow up in a loving, stable family. She wanted them to have a mother who would put their needs first and love them unconditionally. You've become that person for them. I think Maria would be grateful that her boys found someone who cares for them the way you do." "And have you talked to him about this?" "I wanted to talk to you first, but I think he'd be open to it. He told me last week that this is the most stable and secure he's ever felt, and that having a father figure has helped him think about his own future differently." Looked around their kitchen, at the family photos on the refrigerator and the children's artwork taped to the walls. She thought about how far they had all come from that rainy night in the alley behind's diner, when she had made a split-second decision to help a stranger and his children. "There's one thing I need to know," she said finally. "Are you asking me this because you think it's what's best for the boys or because it's what you want for yourself?" Vincent met her eyes directly. "Both. The boys need stability and legal security, and having you as their official mother would provide that. But I also want this for myself. I want to wake up every morning knowing that we're a real family, not just people who are helping each other temporarily. I want to plan vacations and save for college funds and argue about curfews and celebrate graduations together." "And what about us? Are you talking about adoption or are you talking about something more?" Vincent reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, setting it on the table between them. "I'm talking about everything. I'm talking about marriage and adoption and building the life that and Michael deserve. I'm talking about choosing each other every day, not just because of circumstances, but because we love each other and want to be together." Opened the box to reveal a simple but beautiful engagement ring, not ostentatious, but clearly chosen with care and thought. Her hands were shaking as she looked from the ring to Vincent's hopeful expression. "I know this isn't how most relationships develop," Vincent continued. "I know we did everything backwards, starting with the children and the domestic partnership and only now getting to the romance. But I love you. I love your kindness and your strength and the way you make my sons laugh. I love how you've made feel like he belongs somewhere. I love the life we've built together, and I want to make it permanent." Before could respond, walked into the kitchen carrying Michael, who had apparently crawled outside without anyone noticing. "Did I interrupt something important?" he asked, taking in the serious expressions and the ring box on the table. "Actually, you're just in time," Vincent said, standing up with Still in his arms. "I was just asking your sister to marry me and make our family official." Looked from Vincent to, then grinned. "It's about time. I was wondering when you two were going to figure out what the rest of us already knew." "What's that?" asked, laughing despite her emotional overwhelm. "That we're already a family, and we have been since we got here. The paperwork is just catching up to reality." Looked around at the three most important people in her life, all watching her with expressions of love and hope. She thought about the nursing degree she would finish in a few months, the secure home they had built, the future they could plan together without fear or uncertainty. "Yes," she said simply, reaching for the ring. "Yes to all of it." Vincent slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her while clapped his hands and babbled excitedly. Started making exaggerated gagging sounds at their public display of affection, but he was smiling as he did it. Michael reached for his mother and brother, wanting to be part of whatever celebration was happening. Later that evening, after his family had gone home and the boys were asleep, and Vincent sat on their back porch talking about practical details. They would need to contact lawyers about the adoption process, plan a wedding that would satisfy both their desire for simplicity and expectations for celebration, and discuss how to handle questions about their unconventional beginning. But mostly, they talked about the future they wanted to build together. Vincent's consulting business was growing, and he was considering expanding to include other former executives who wanted to transition away from questionable business practices. Would start her hospital job after graduation, specializing in emergency nursing, because her experience with crisis situations had taught her she was good at staying calm under pressure. Would graduate from high school with grades good enough to get into several Oregon universities, and he was leaning toward studying business with the goal of eventually becoming Vincent's partner in the consulting firm. And Michael would grow up knowing they were loved and wanted, with a large extended family through and the connections they were building in Portland. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had just called the police that night?" Vincent asked, reaching for his hand. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but not because I regret the choice I made. I think about it because it reminds me how much our lives can change because of one decision to help someone who needs it. I'll spend the rest of my life being grateful that you made that choice." Squeezed his hand and looked through the window at their sleeping sons. "I didn't save you that night, Vincent. We saved each other." As they sat together planning their future, neither of them could have imagined that their story would become the foundation for a family legacy that would span generations. Years later, when and Michael were adults with children of their own, they would still tell the story of how their parents met during the worst night of their father's life, and how their mother's courage and compassion had given them all a second chance at happiness. But that night, sitting on the porch of their Portland home, they were simply two people who had found love in the most unlikely circumstances, building a life that honored both the pain of their past and the hope of their future. They were living proof that sometimes the best families are the ones you choose, and that love can grow from the smallest act of kindness extended to a stranger in need. The neon signs of Chicago and the fear-filled nights in hospital waiting rooms were behind them now. Ahead lay wedding planning and college applications, first steps and first words, little league games and school plays, and all the ordinary miracles that make up a life lived with intention and love. In the end, their story was about more than crime and rescue and redemption. It was about recognizing that everyone deserves a chance at happiness, and that sometimes the courage to offer help to a stranger can transform not just their life, but your own in ways you never expected. It was about choosing hope over fear, love over safety, and family over everything else that might seem more important but ultimately matters less. As the Oregon rain began to fall softly outside, realized that she had finally found her way home. "Okay," she said quietly, "let's go to Portland." The next few days would determine not just Vincent's future and his son's safety, but also whether was willing to bet her own carefully constructed life on the possibility that helping this family was worth whatever risks lay ahead in Portland. The first day was going to be a test for all of them, but Vincent felt hopeful for the first time in weeks. Whatever happened next, at least his children were safe, and he had found an unexpected ally in his fight to protect them. Being involved in something complicated and potentially dangerous, then that's what she was going to do. The choice was made. There was no going back now.